Hello my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Europa Rediviva. Today I'd like to talk about why sovereigntism as an ideological movement has to be left-wing, is by definition a left-wing movement. And I will have several approaches. The first one is theoretical, starting from the definitions of the concepts. What do we understand by left-wing and what do we understand by sovereigntism? First of all, in the evolution of society, of Western society at least, there has been this process in which the masses have slowly gained more rights through struggle, political struggle, union struggle, protests, armed uprisings, and this evolution led to them having the right to vote. The universal suffrage is not exactly something very old. It is a late development. It's something from the 20th century. And states have started to define themselves constitutionally as being the emanation of the will of the people. So sovereignty stems not only from being independent from a foreign power, nominally independent. Sovereignty also means that the state is the outcome of the will, the collective will of the people, and as a consequence has to function in the interest of the people, of the majority of the people. And therefore, sovereigntism as a recent political development, is the ideology of getting the state out of the clutches of the global capital forces and to make it function in the interest of the people again, in the interest of the majority of the people. It is essentially a populist movement. A populist movement in the sense that in any democratic society, all political movements that want to gain power should be populist movements. I can understand that there are some political movements that want to exist just for their token value. They want to be a political minority. They cater for a minority in society. Their objective is not to gain power and not to govern society in the interest of the majority, but they are rather the exception. In the Netherlands, for example, there are two such token parties, the SGP and the PVDD, Staatskundige Hervormde Partij and the Partij voor de Dieren. The first one is Protestant, reformed political party that wants society to be run by the Bible, so it is just like a Sharia type of party but in Christianity, and its purpose is not to gain power. Its purpose is just to affirm these values, and this is why it doesn't get into governmental coalitions. It does not make its program more appealing for the broader society. No, it just exists because a very narrow sliver of Dutch society that is fundamentally Protestant, that is fundamentalist to this day, wants to vote for this party and for this party to exist. And the other one is the Animal Welfare Party, and it also exists just to draw attention of the cruelties that animals have to suffer in industrial agriculture, and they want to advocate for more rights for the animals, but they also do not plan to govern, do not plan to become part in any governmental coalition so as to rule for the people, for the majority. They are parties that cater for the interests of minority groups in society, and they just exist for this purpose. But the great majority of the political forces actually want to get into power, with the exception of Romania nowadays, when nobody wants to form the government. But if we leave that aside, generally speaking, political parties exist in order to gain power and in order to govern. And sovereigntism is this political movement that wants to take power away from transnational capital, that wants to take power away from these globalist forces, from those people that gather at the World Economic Forum every year, or at Bilderberg, or now I understand that there's this Peter Thiel type of gathering It has been leaked that some elite groups also gather under the auspices of Peter Thiel, and they discuss similar things that they discuss in the World Economic Forum plus sex. But anyway, so it's obvious for everybody that these elite groups in Western society have gained control of the countries that form up the collective West. And various political movements have started to spring up in these countries in order to take some power back for the citizenry. And this is why you cannot say that the sovereigntism movement can be in any other way than left-wing. Because if we take left and right in their initial meaning, what they stood for when they were created, during the French Revolution, in the first General Assembly, in the first assembly of the French Parliament after the revolution took place, on the left side, in the left benches, were the people who were on the part of the revolution, and on the right side were the ancien régime, or the people who are on the side of the clergy, the aristocracy, and so on. And therefore, populism in itself is a left-wing movement. It cannot be otherwise. It cannot be anything but left-wing, because it caters for the great majority of the society. The notion of elite, by definition, means that it is a minority. You cannot have a society where the majority is the elite. No. You have this social pyramid, and the closer you are to the top, the narrower the rungs. And of course, the elite sits at the top of the pyramid. There's nothing debatable about that. And therefore, you cannot have a populist movement that is sovereigntist and that wants to take control back from transnational, international capital. That is anything but left-wing. However, in practice, there are several weird developments in certain European countries, and these developments have to do with the properties of those societies to begin with. So, for example, in Germany, AfD is a populist movement, but it is a conservative movement, and it is somehow it has at least a right-wing aesthetic, and it tries to revive aristocratic values. It tries to have a conservative discourse, conservative national discourse, and to somehow associate itself with the old aristocracy, old Prussia, these kinds of things. However, its main electoral base is in East Germany. The people there vote for AfD and for Die Linke and for Bündnis Wagenknecht, exactly because they do not trust the neoliberal system that they became part of after reunification. So this is rather a dissident movement of Eastern Germans, and to some extent it is a left-wing movement. Their base is left-wing, even though they criticize the current German state on the lines of criticisms waged against the German Democratic Republic. So, for example, their persecution, they liken it to the Stasi, to the secret police activities in Eastern Germany. But their constituents are still there, and the reason they are not brainwashed for neoliberalism is exactly because they were educated under communism, and they received a different set of values through their education, and they became much more skeptical to the mainstream discourse. For 45 years, they knew that the media was not exactly telling the truth, but it was telling the discourse of the power. And since 1990, since their reunification, this did not change. They did not start to regard Western German media as being the truth, but rather just the discourse of power in that society. And in Romania, there's also this development that the biggest sovereigntist party is right-wing, or claims to be right-wing, even though its constituents are not exactly aristocrats, and the people who vote for this party, the electoral base, are not exactly driven by some sort of aristocratic values. But since this is the main opposition party, this is what the majority of the Romanians prefer in the polls. And they have this misguided idea that instead of deriving their discourse and their identity from the regime that was before 1989, which was a regime of national development, they try to branch their discourse from the ideology of reactionaryism. So from the discourse of the parties of the interwar period, which catered to the landed aristocracy, and to a political movement that was opposed to the communists, which were functioning in illegality. And this political movement became a proxy for Nazi Germany later on. So the current sovereigntist movement in Romania is based in these alleged right-wing values, even though they cater to a left-wing base, they cater to the majority of the population. And this happens because the majority of the population, so the poor people of Romania, don't have the time to get themselves involved in politics, don't trust the political process anymore. They are highly individualistic and they look for solutions outside of any sort of collaborative forms. They look for individual solutions, either through immigration or through all sorts of schemes that they devise in order to get ahead in Romania. And they do not believe in politicians, they do not believe in politics, they do not go out and vote. This is why the turnout is rather low in most Romanian elections. And the reason they vote for this party is rather to fight against this neoliberal hegemonic force that functions at the behest of different Western countries. But the ideology of this movement is not exactly populist. So the main spokespeople for this party do not want to cater for the masses. They do not want to provide public services. They are rather attracted by models of governance that are strongly neo-colonial, like that of Javier Milei. So, at least in their discourse, their economic ideology is no different than that of their opponents. They try to argue that Romania should be sovereign by lowering taxes to domestic capital instead of offering better public services for the majority of the people. I don't think this will lead them very far, but this is the level of consciousness that is unfolding right now in Romanian politics. It is way different in Bulgaria, for example. In Bulgaria, there is this political movement that is sovereigntist and left-wing, and that swept the political class. This party called Progressive Bulgaria, founded by Rumen Radev, that won the elections, won an absolute majority in the last elections. And it actually originated from the Socialist Party, from the Bulgarian Socialist Party, which was the continuator of the Bulgarian Communist Party. But it gained a lot of the sovereigntist vote because the biggest sovereigntist party in Bulgaria, Vazrajdane, actually decries the post-1989 regime, the neoliberal, the capitalist regime, decries the status of Bulgaria as a puppet state to the United States. And it is very much in favor of the social policies that the socialist government of Bulgaria carried out until 1989. So to have a national economy, to have state-owned enterprises, to have social protection, to have good quality public services, all of these things. In Bulgaria, the sovereigntist movement is left-wing. Even though it cherishes national heroes, it is economically left-wing, and this is actually what left-wing used to mean. It was only after 2010 that Occupy Wall Street was deemed a very dangerous movement for the established elites, and then the woke movement was created to astroturf the left-wing movements and to create this confusion. Essentially, the global elites from Wall Street financed this fake left-wing movement that is now dominant in Western European societies and in the United States, in which socialism was no longer about economic redistribution. It was no longer about improving the lives of the majority of the population. No, it was about fetishizing all sorts of weird minorities, fetishizing sexual quirks, sexual kinks, fetishizing all sorts of made-up gender identities and sexual orientations and all these things. And it caught on because it was also accompanied by a general decline in education levels. So school was made way easier, and in Western societies you have these generations who fall for anything. Essentially, they do not have any sort of critical judgment. They are led by these pseudo-intellectuals who receive money from the United States and who tell them that they should have as their main celebration the Pride Parade. This is their main identity day. Instead of the National Day, instead of, May 1st, which celebrates the 8-hour work day and the gaining of economic rights for the majority of the people, they celebrate Pride. It is this secular holiday that has replaced any kind of religious, national or social celebration, and that these Western elites manufactured in order to supplant the redistributive left that actually had grievances against international transnational capital and that wanted to obtain rights for the majority of the citizens, economic rights, and to lower the power of these financial elites in establishing the direction that society takes. In the United States, this is very obvious. It is through these campaign contributions of these corporations and of these investment funds that both the Democratic and the Republican Party get their members elected, and these members have exactly the same agenda, just like their corporations that fund both parties have the same agenda. And in Europe we have something similar. These parties have been co-opted by these transnational elites, which are formed through these transatlantic programs and that function at the behest of the United States, and whose main driver is to just privatize as much as possible from their economies to BlackRock and to American investment funds, and to sanction their countries as much as possible, and to make them as dependent as possible to the United States in terms of energy, in terms of weapons procurement, in terms of every conceivable infrastructure that should support the national economy. And this is why these movements in Western Europe are in many countries misguided, because they oppose this fake left, bringing in these national values, while at the same time claiming to be right-wing. So if you try to make a populist right-wing movement, you are doomed to fail. This is something that's it has a contradiction at its base. From its inception, it is bound to be headed nowhere. And this is why in Germany I would much regard Bündnisser Wagenknecht as a real sovereigntist movement rather than the AfD, because the AfD, for example, will lose the vote of the immigrant population, whereas Bündnisser Wagenknecht, while it opposes illegal immigration and while it opposes mass immigration, it still wants to cater to the, let's say, new Germans, to the people who have citizenship, who have the right to vote, who have assimilated to some extent into German society, and who also face the same problems of the precarity of living and the deindustrialization of Germany and perhaps the preparations for war. They also face the same consequences of the co-opting of the German state by these transatlantic elites, and they would vote for a party that tries to bring power back into national hands. But they might be alienated from this aristocratic Prussian discourse that AfD wants to bring back. And it's the same in the Netherlands. The party that I used to vote for, Forum for Democratie, which is still a decent party, and it still is in line with most of my political views. So it is against the war preparations. It is against mass migration. It is against being subservient to Israel, which the majority of the European political elite is. It still is in line with most of my political views, but and here is the big but. It caters to a certain right-wing audience, and in doing so, it alienates the naturalized Dutch vote, because while opposing illegal immigration and while opposing the mass refugee influx and while opposing the establishment of these refugee centers all across the Netherlands, they're also saying that the Dutch population is being replaced, and here they do not acknowledge the Dutch. Well, they do not acknowledge the let's say the citizenship rights of the people, well, like myself, who became Dutch through naturalization and who form part of Dutch society in a way or another, and who might want to vote for them even though they are not ethnically Dutch. So this is the big paradox. For example, in Dutch society, a very strong progressive force, in my opinion, is the Turkish party. And while the Turkish party and the Forum for Democratie are ideologically opposed on how they regard on how they regard Dutch identity, and while Forum for Democratie has an ethnic designation for this identity, whereas the Turkish party DENK has a civic designation for Dutch identity. Apart from this, they are in line. They are in line regarding Palestine. They are in line regarding not waging war against Russia. They are in line in terms of being economically progressive. The only thing that's dubious about the Turkish party is that it borrows from the NATO discourse, and this is also a discourse that Turkey favors regarding the Uyghurs in China, and therefore it is an anti-China party. This is the only place where we diverge, me and DENK. But my point is that it is hard to make a populist movement that is at the same time right-wing, because the majority of the population are not elites. They do not descend from the elites. They do not descend from the landed aristocracy, from the landed gentry of centuries ago. They do not descend from the heirs that operated the Dutch East India Company, in the case of the Netherlands, and so on. So if you want to have broad mass appeal, you have to also appeal to the broad mass values, which are mainly economical. And in Romania, I mentioned in the previous episode that I regard a possible solution the merger of the sovereigntist party or the sovereigntist movement with some former social democrats, perhaps those that were at the helm of the Social Democratic Party a decade ago when they were being lawfared by the criminal justice system. Those people were sovereigntists in the sense that they wanted to tax the multinationals, they wanted to make these networks of retail stores to sell the produce of the peasants rather than have only these international chains that mainly sell imported foodstuffs. They wanted to repatriate the gold of the National Bank of Romania. They wanted to do all sorts of progressive national things that are in the national interest, and they were purged and they were sent to prison for all sorts of bogus, trumped-up charges. And if Romania is to become sovereign again, the only solution I can think of is not this elitist type of discourse of oh, we descend from the boyars and from the voivodes, but rather this this junction with the social democrats, with the true social democrats, and those that were doing populist politics a decade ago, and to have some sort of political program that appeals to the masses and that appeals to the economic interests of the masses and that want to lift the welfare of the Romanian people, and not just to appeal to national values. I actually had a conversation with somebody from the sovereigntism movement. I will not name him because well, he didn't do anything bad to me. It's just a duel of ideas, so I'm just trying to refute his idea. He said that if you give Romanians something to be proud of, you no longer have to give them public services. You no longer have to do redistribution. And of course, I contradicted him. I was not in agreement with him. I said that sovereigntism should be about redistribution. Sovereigntism should be about increasing the economic level of the majority of the population. Should be about abolishing absolute poverty. You do not just go to the, let's say, most disenfranchised communities and just put a flag label pin on their chest and think that that's enough. So this is what I wanted to talk to you about today. If you like what I do, like, share, subscribe. If you want to support me financially, you'll find a link in the channel description how to do so. And until next time, take care.